Live today. My name is Julie Hirschberg. I am the owner of Reactive Therapy and Wellness in the Los Angeles area. And it is here where it's our mission to help people with neurologic disorders really recover their movement, their strength, their confidence in a way that is really changing the brain. And we do this all the time through one-on-one therapy, through exercise, through our OTPT psychology programs that we have. And we do a lot of it through educating other therapists. And that's why I'm hopping in here today to talk about some of these things that we've been learning here, that we've been sharing with people, that we're going to be learning over the next couple of months, because we are hosting a course next month in March on, it's called Neuropracticity 3.0, The Brain Strikes Back. Mike Studer, an amazing neurologic physical therapist and colleague of ours, has taught a version of this course for the past couple of years. This year, I am most excited in particular for some of the concepts that we're going to talk about today. So a lot of this was based on some things that Mike sent to me as like, hey, I'm thinking about these concepts for the course. And then that got me thinking. So it got me really thinking, actually, when last week, I'm not sure if this has happened to you, if you were working with somebody, but I was working with a person who has dystonia in the leg. Um, and we started some different things for that. He was looking a lot better, but there was still some asymmetry. So on a hunch, I was like, you know what, let's toss the ball. Okay, so he really loves sports. We start tossing the ball, and his walk completely normalized. And he did not look like he had dystonia at all. And those asymmetries were completely gone. So simple, right? So for him, for many of the other people that I work with, that we work with at Reactive, for neurologic disorders in general, attention to the body part or the pain or the involuntary movement makes it worse. It amplifies it. This is actually the definition in the definition of a functional movement disorder, but also such a big part of other things. We know when we drive intention internally to the body versus externally, we lose some of that automatic movement that we had otherwise had since we were born, right? So, um, so this attention and where we put our attention is so important. And then when you add fear into the mix, so now maybe I'm thinking, oh, is the dystonia going to come here? So I'm thinking about it ahead of time. Or I have fear like, okay, if I do this, maybe I'm going to experience pain, or maybe I'm going to have a tremor. That also is going to fuel some of this dysfunctional movement. And that was some of the concept that Mike sent me this week that I was really excited to share with you. These things, attention, fear, and changes in movement all go hand in hand. So today we're going to talk about what actually happens in the brain when you have this self-directed internal focus, because I can't just like go, okay, that's a great concept. I got to know what's happening in the brain. I want to talk about why an external focus can drive brain changes. And then how do we do this, right? We're going to talk about the optimal theory. I actually had posted something about this on our Instagram, and somebody said, yeah, that's great. Like I can walk really well if I'm walking the dog or doing something else, but I can't walk the dog all day. Well, you're right. You can't just walk the dog or throw a ball or do a Stroop task all day long, right? So you have to be able to train this so that it becomes automatic in daily life. So we're going to talk about that. So let's start with the brain, and I'm going to throw in, as usual, I love to do a lot of reading, and there were a few articles that are fairly new, within like the last 10 years, but a couple of them just in the last year, looking um, at what happens in the brain. So in this first one, They looked at the external focus, and they were looking at a finger sequence that was either internally focused, so like moving your finger, versus externally focused, which was tapping on a keyboard. And then they looked at fMRI with this. And what they found is when there's an external focus compared to the internal focus, there's higher activation of somatosensory and motor cortex, those key areas of cortex that drive our movement, right? So I found that really fascinating. So that's one piece of the pie. What is happening? Let me post that link. I'll post that in the comments here. This was that particular paper looking at finger movements. Okay. Second, so this was a really interesting paper looking at females who might be anxiety sensitive. I would put myself in that category. So this one really interests me. And in this particular study, what they found is that an internal focus of attention upregulates the amygdala activity. And the amygdala is kind of part of the fear center in our brain. So that internal focus upregulates the amygdala. So if you are like me and already prone to be a little bit on the anxious side, then that internal focus will make that worse, right? So again, I found that really fascinating. Let me throw a link in here so we can see increased amygdala activation in internal focus. We see increased activation of sensory motor cortex in external focus. And then I saw this really lovely study with music. This one was called Cerebral Effects of Music During Isometric Exercise. I'm a huge music fan, love to have music on all of the time, but love it in therapy for sure. What they found with the music is that the music moved the attention externally and upregulated some affective arousal. It also increased activity in the left inferior frontal gyrus. Okay, so frontal lobe there. And what they found is that when somebody had increased activity in their left inferior frontal gyrus, their perceived exertion went down. So there, the external focus also then led the person to feel like they were exerting themselves less. And I'm sure that if you are a runner like me or anybody that likes to exercise to music, you can feel the same way. When you have that on, it actually becomes an external focus, especially if it helps drive a rhythm of your activity. And that alone can lower the exertion, but it changes the activation in the cortex. So we're not just saying, let's do this because it looks better, but let's do this to change the brain. And when we're talking about neurologic disorders, we want to change the brain. So that really gets to both of those questions: what happens in the brain if we do the internal directed, and why an external focus can really drive brain changes. And somebody just asked the question, great question: when I'm focused on a task, I don't notice my symptoms of 3PD. Yes, so this is very, very applicable in 3PD. In fact, I said this would be the exact thing in 3PD, because in 3PD, that attention and awareness of the symptoms drives a loop of the symptoms, both visually and vestibularly. Vestibularly, I'm not sure that's a word, but in the vestibular system is what I mean. So when there's more focus and attention on the symptoms versus an external, like the task that you're doing, the symptoms tend to increase. It doesn't mean it's actually in your head. And now you know why. I mean, it is in your head, it's in your brain. It doesn't mean that you're doing that on purpose or that you made it up by any means. What it means is that that internal focus of your symptoms actually changes the brain. And when you move to an external focus, that also changes the brain, and it changes it in a positive direction. So let's talk about how do we do this? And we really cannot talk about internal versus external focus without talking about the optimal theory. So I want to start there. What is the optimal theory? What's the science behind this? And this part is so near and dear to my heart because it's really rooted in some of those fields of motor control and motor learning that Dick Schmidt pioneered. Dick Schmidt is the namesake of our movement disorder fellowship. So I love this stuff. So optimal theory stands for optimizing performance through intrinsic motivation and attention for learning. So we can't talk about attention without optimal theory. This is a huge part of the course, the neuroplasticity course that we do with Mike Studer, and we just keep adding more depth and layers to our understanding of it. So the optimal theory looks at autonomy, enhanced expectancies, and external focus of attention. And we're gonna keep our eye on external focus today, but those other two are also extremely important. And Marcy, who put the comment about 3PD, extremely important for 3PD as well. So what does external focus mean exactly? And how does that differ from internal focus? So external focus is focusing on the environment or the goal instead of yourself. This doesn't mean like not self-care, but a really good example is if you're walking and I notice something in your walking, I might say, okay, well, can you pick up your foot a little higher? That would be an internal focus because I'm asking you to attend to your foot. If instead, so this is a really simple example, if instead I put a little piece of tape or a sticker on your foot and I said, lift that sticker towards the ceiling, now you have an external focus. You're focused on a sticker and you're focused on the ceiling. And that changes everything. So this is why we have stickers and tape all over the clinic. And I have people put stickers and tape all over things. Even when I was training and running for the marathon, I had some funky run things. I put a piece of tape on my knee and it really helped. I know this might seem really silly, but it works. It works. The evidence here works in athletes. That's really where all of this started. It works for people with Parkinson's, post-stroke. I mean, you name it, and these principles are over and over and over again. So some of the literature comes from even golf. So when you're hitting a golf ball, that do you focus on the motion of the golf club or the trajectory of the ball, or are you internally focused on your hand position or your arms? And I can tell you from when I first tried golfing, I had a lot of people telling me, well, do this with your hands and this with your hips and this with your arms. And I was just like a total mess. I think I would have been much better off with a focus on the motion of my golf club or the trajectory of the ball, for example. So the literature here, by the way, in optimal has been shown to improve balance, improve accuracy in sport, movement efficiency. So even how muscles are contracting change with that goal. This is why in dystonia or a functional disorder or 3PD, the brain areas change when we change that external focus. So this really then improves our automaticity. It improves that automatic motion and use of information in our environment that we've known and integrated for our whole lives. And one of the big reasons this occurs is because focusing on that goal or task instead of ourselves leads to much more effective coupling of the goal and the action together. That's how we learned as babies to move, right? And we do funny things as adults. So I want to talk, so we're going to take this attention piece also into that fear piece. I'll post a link here to Mike Studer's blog post because it is phenomenal, I think. So let me pull this in here. Short and sweet. I highly recommend you read it. And And again, he's going to be teaching our course here next month. So Mike talks about this idea of fear inhibited behavior. So when you become aware first, so when attention is drawn to pain, to dizziness, to the dystonia, you can start to change your movement and your behavior right away. And this has been, it's known that fear influences movement. As Mike talks about in his blog, this is very clear in pain, return to sport after an ACL injury, pelvic health, and definitely neurologic disorders. Absolutely. And so what we're going to talk about in our neuroplasticity course is how can we intervene before the fear actually causes us to avoid movement. Because if you have dystonia, if you have dizziness, if you have tremor, you will start avoiding things that might make that worse, right? And then that actual avoidance of those things ends up circling back and spiraling back to make the symptoms worse. And so if we can actually intervene at that initial attention and awareness to recognize that the fear might be inhibiting some behavior, then we can decrease the length of time that you may have those symptoms and also send you on that uphill spiral instead of the downhill spiral. So this is if you look at Mike's blog, you can kind of see where it goes from fear inhibited to fear avoidant behavior. And basically, we want to stop that in the tracks. So many ways to do that. External focus of attention is one of them. So we move that awareness, but it also needs to be coupled with the other parts of the optimal theory: autonomy, enhanced expectancy. So we'll have to stay tuned because that's not the focus of this one today, because those pieces are really, really important. Building autonomy, knowing that there's improvement to be made as well. That's so important. These are all topics from our neuroplasticity course, which Mike Suter is leading with us. It's a weekend course, really advanced learning and motor control and motor learning, and applying that in neurologic disorders, including 3PD, including Meniere's disease, advanced cognitive decline, post-stroke, Parkinson's disease. So it's really kind of the best course that I do every year, to be honest. I learn so much. So I posted a link in here if you're interested in that weekend course. It's approved for CEUs, for PTs and OTs, and it really is a life-changing course. If you're really interested in this particular topic of attention and fear and how it might change movement, this is a really great course for that. I think you'd really love it. But we're going to keep talking about these concepts a lot because we're diving into them with Mike. So you'll stay tuned for me probably for the next month in some of these concepts to share some of the insight that we're gaining as well. And as usual, we're just learning alongside of you, and so thankful that you're on this journey with us as well and sharing with me every Friday. So thanks so much, and we will catch you next week.